All right, so what was a type of warfare during the First World War? What was the area between the trenches called? And explain life in the trenches. So yeah, you don't have to look too far to really answer that first question, but there you go. All right, so other names for World War One, you might see this on the test too. The war to end all wars. Boy, was that one wrong, huh? Yeah. We'll talk about it when we get to the interwar period, moving into World War II. Some historians just say, well, it was just one long war with a brief, pause period there between the two conflicts, which some people, and if you look at it, there's a lot of truth to that. All right. Um, Also another one is the Great War. So the Great War, that's just another name for World War One. All right, so I'll let you guys work on this. We'll move on. All right, next week I have an idea for a project. Typically, I just have you research some forms of weaponry during World War One, but I actually think this one might be a little bit more creative and fun for you. So I'm gonna have you create an infographic, almost like in a way that you're trying to sell an armament. So with the weapons of World War One, there's a lot of new ones. Okay, in order to try to break the gridlock, break the stalemate. And what I want you to do is just research, advertise, like you're a weapons dealer in a way. Well, hopefully don't get in trouble with this at school, but you're gonna try to present a weapon of warfare for whatever country, obviously the Allied powers, hopefully you're fighting for them, huh? That they would purchase your weapon, that they would utilize it in war. So that's the idea for next week when I talk about certain weapons of warfare. I think that would be a fun project for you. So just looking ahead, that's what I got. It's pretty good, actually. That was nice color. Yeah. All right, so everybody else, I'm assuming did it online. Anyway, we'll talk about those questions here on the back, right, on the other page shortly. All right, real quick, type of warfare, what do we got? What do we got here? Wyatt. Warfare? Yeah, it's trench warfare. Good job. Anyway, as the video was talking about, I was talking about yesterday. This is very defensive, right? There's really not much going on. You're pretty much just waiting for your enemy to make their way across. What was that area between the trenches? Audrina. No man's land. Yes, good. So with no man's land, this is the area between the trenches. There's a lot Well, I guess not a lot of movement here, really. Towards the end of the war, we started to see a lot of movement when more weapons started to be developed, and tanks pretty much used as just battering rams, right? So when we think about tanks, it's not like what you see in modern day or World War II even. They're pretty much just massive armored vehicles used as a massive shield where the troops would get behind and try to make their way across no man's land. Anyway, we'll talk about some of the other weapons again more next week. And I think that would be a fun activity, a fun project for you. What I was just talking about before we started here. All right, what else do we know about the trenches? How'd they dig these trenches? In a straight line? Huh? What'd they do? Naomi.
They couldn't just like normal.
Yeah, good job, right? So with the trenches, they're dug out more in a zigzag, okay, in a zigzag. So the reason for it, if an enemy jumps down in the trench, they're not wiping everybody out in one single burst, right? So the idea is to have breaks in the trenches. All right, like I was saying yesterday too, barbed wire in front to make sure that the enemy has, well, somewhat of an opposition before they make to the trench, right? Machine gun nests, snipers, you gotta imagine they load it here in the firing trench, the front line trench, right? This is a good example here too, looking back at some of the areas where the troops would maybe get a night's sleep. Good luck with the constant firing and just the paranoia, the fear of your enemy making their way across no man's land when they're sleeping, right? Communication, and obviously here in Bunker 3, and even parts of 2, where the commanders would meet to try to plan out maybe their next attack, maybe having some sort of shift across no man's land. Right in the back trenches here, okay, again, more communication, and then here's the artillery battery. We're constantly firing into no man's land, constantly firing on the enemy trench. So, yeah, this was just a long, drawn out war, and there really wasn't a lot of movement other than the trenches dug out. How many miles of trenches were dug out in the Western Front? Luna?
100 miles?
Yes, 400 miles of trenches. So if you're looking at this map here, oh, you can't see the laser. So as you're looking at the map, from the English Channel all the way down here to the Alps. So up here, all the way down to the Alps, the mountain ranges, right here in Europe. So 400 miles dug out just in the Western Front. I didn't talk about the Eastern Front. Anyway, real quick, so with these trenches, okay, this was, again, just a boring, drawn-out conflict. So as you're looking at it, here's a good look at it as well in the presentation. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned about some of these sandbags utilized to help protect the troops in the trenches, along with, well, this firing step. They call it a firing step, right? So you step up on it to shoot out over the trench. And obviously, well, there's not great drainage, right? The Germans kind of figured it out as they were hunkered down a little bit better. They had a better life, I guess you could say, in the trenches than what the Allied powers had, right? They were waiting out for a longer war. Anyway, as that water would build up, well, a lot of the troops sitting in it, right, standing in it for a long, long period of time. One of the biggest ailments, one of the biggest concerns, issues for these soldiers was what? What was it, Adrena? Trench foot, yes, good. So trench foot was gross, disgusting. You guys ever see Mr. Deeds before? His black foot? No, he has no feeling. No, Mr. Deeds, really? Madeline likes him, no? Adam Sandler fan? Oh, well, no, Mr. Deeds. Okay, all right. So anyway, trench foot. This is where it's constantly in moisture, constantly in harsh conditions, and their feet would get numb to a point where you lose feeling, and after some time, right, this could spread up your leg. So you got to take care of your feet, keep them dry, and yeah, how disturbing that was. Anyway, with that, rats, right? Rats was one of the big issues too here in the trenches, because well, the dead bodies piling up. Okay, the dead bodies and the feces, right? Let's face it, in the trenches, you got to go to the bathroom where you're standing because you got to constantly keep an eye on no man's land, constantly keep an eye on the enemy. So this was disturbing, disgusting. You got to imagine. So the rats, like I mentioned yesterday, a lot of the troops here would actually surround their bedding with barbed wire to try to protect themselves from these rats. Right? A lot of reports of these troops waking up on both sides with these rats gnawing off their limbs. Gross, disgusting, terrible. All right, so anyway, life in the trenches was brutal. Limited food, limited water. Again, the elements constantly coming down on top of your head. Like I said, it's 33 degrees out right now. Well, just a week or two ago where it was negative 15. Could you imagine? Awful. And again, the sheer boredom, right? You're constantly thinking in your mind when the enemy's going to make their way across. right? And you gotta constantly stay on guard, ready to go for this war to break out at any moment, right? You don't know when the next meal's gonna come, medication, forget it. And like the video stated too, right, what was the biggest killer? Was it warfare? Was it the bullets flying at you? What was it? Awesome. Disease and sickness, yep. So malnutrition, right? You gotta imagine too, just being out in the elements for that long, disease, sickness spreads pretty rampant, killing off a lot of people. You guys see the announcement Mrs. O'Neill posted for you? Yeah, some of the areas, the environment, the terrain, still in Europe today. The effects of the trenches dug out for all these miles in Europe. Still today, you can see some of that reference there, which is kind of wild, right? Knowing that there's another world war coming after it. But yeah, still today, in some farm fields, you can see some of the trenches still dug out through the land. All right, last thing I want to mention, with trench warfare, I thought this was unique. When we talk about the Eastern Front, Germany and Russia, as they're duking it out, they actually had another enemy they had to worry about. And again, that's not, obviously each other, but they actually had a ceasefire for a brief time to fight off wolves, which is crazy enough. So wolves out in the Eastern Front, when you think about parts of Russia, right, Eastern Germany, they actually were getting eaten food left and right by these packs of wolves, and they actually had a ceasefire with one another to try to hunt these down, which I thought that was interesting. I thought that was unique, right? How they would just do that. We'll mention about it during certain holidays on the Western Front, like Christmas, right? The two sides would have a ceasefire, come out, talk with one another, even play soccer, play games with one another out in no man's land. And then the next day, it's like, okay, gotta get back to killing you. See ya. Yeah, it's just kind of unique, kind of strange how they would do things. All right, like I mentioned, weapons of warfare. We'll talk more about that later. Real quick, I also attached a link to the trenches. So here's kind of like a VR experience. Oh, yep. So there's audio. I'm just gonna pause the audio for now, but you can walk through the trenches here. Right. This I thought was pretty cool. Right, and gives you kind of an opening, an eye-opening experience of walking through the trenches. So again, I linked that to yesterday's video lesson. I can link it into today's as well. And you guys can walk through the trenches. Like I said, the audio's there, which is nice. So that audio will play as you're making your trip, right, through the trenches of World War I. So it gives you an idea of what life was like. All right, last thing here. Review game. You guys ready for a review game? Trash can basketball, trash ball. Here we go.